Your turn.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to Your Turn, the podcast for those who are passionate about creating board games. Here, we share stories, insights, and creative journey from board game designers and publishers in Vietnam and around the world. I'm Ionah, a game designer and currently the CEO of Everjoy Global, and I'm so excited to be your host today. Our special guest today is a designer whose work has brought the beauty of the Pacific Northwest into millions of homes around the world. He's a creative mind behind the award-winning game Cascadia. Today, we'll dive into his design process, inspiration, and his role as a judge for the Road to Ascent 2025 competition. Welcome to Your Turn, Randy Flynn.
Thank you, Ionah. I'm happy to be here. I'm glad to talk with folks and talk about my games with you.
Awesome. And where are you speaking from?
I'm speaking from my home in Seattle, Washington, in Cascadia, the Pacific Northwest.
Cool. Okay. Randy, thank you so much for joining us. So I guess the first question for you is, could you please introduce yourself and share how you first began your journey into board game design?
I am a software engineer by trade and by graduate from college. I've been doing that since then. And I live here in Seattle now for a little over 30 years, growing up on the East Coast and traveling around a little bit. I really did play games as a kid, but I didn't keep that. At a certain point, I switched over to video games. Sometime around, high school into college, I played a lot of video games of various kinds instead. And then it was really as an adult when I met my now wife, Marlene, and her son, now my son, who was about 9 at the time we met. And they played Castle Panic, and he had played some chess as a kid and one or two other things. And it got me curious about games I had heard about. And so I did some research on those and other games appropriate for that age group. 2 of the games I ended up picking up from that were Settlers of Catan and Carcassonne. So I guess I did pretty good research. And those became staples along with a bunch of others after that to play with my wife and my son, eventually my sister-in-law and others at our house. We played Ticket to Ride a lot. We played King of Tokyo a lot. A little bit of Munchkin. It's easier for the kids than the adults. And like that. So we played quite a lot of games for a number of years. And I said I'm a software engineer. Well, that comes from liking to build things, basically. I started building things when I was a kid, originally physical things, wood, models, and even some kind of game kind of things out of different components. And then I switched to computers. By the time I was in high school, I was doing computers instead. So I could build like real things so much faster. And it felt like the world was open to me without needing to go find physical components and do all sorts of things in this new world. That's when the term personal computer was really coming into play. So that's what I did, and that's how I ended up building software for 35 years now. And playing games, that's what I realized after a while. I was like, I like building things. Games are clearly things you have to build, you have to put together, you have to come up with ideas, you have to make the systems work. So I started messing around in my spare time, doing a game design, and it was sort of off and on. I did a little here, a little there over a couple of years. I really didn't do all that much, and then I got serious about it. There was one time where it was the very beginning of 2017, and I just it might have been the Christmas of 2016 when I really thought about this. The holidays is like, I'm gonna push on this game I've been designing and make it playable and make it work. And so it became a big time hobby for the next 6 months doing that. And it worked. I got to a point where I had a game that my family and some of our close friends could play. It took the first game took 6 hours. Eventually got down to about 2 hours. And that was kind of where I was off to the start. Once I got to the point where it was playable, I stopped that game and said, okay, let me design something I think I might be able to get published. Because through that process, I realized I don't just want to build the games. I actually want to build games that many, many people will play. And so I'd like to get them published.
what year did you start doing this? Like, what year did you publish your first game?
I think I started working on that the first game in maybe 2015. I don't know exactly, and it was 2017 when I got serious about it and really started doing it. And then it was 2018 when I first went to Gen Con and pitched and truly pitched games to publishers, and that's when I got Tabriz signed. So that was kind of the next step in the journey. Of year and a half after I started. So.
Yeah, wonderful. And so it seemed to me that you entered the design world later than most designers. What did you bring from your previous professional or business experience that shaped your approach to design?
Mm. I think one of the big things that I bring comes from, talked about it, just mentioned it a bit ago, building systems. In software, you often have to build these different parts of a system that work together and to give you the entire experience. So you have some idea in mind of what that experience should be, but what are all the different parts you have to do to make it work, given all the restraints of the computers you're running on, the network connections, or any of that. And so I think, although I'm not someone who is always does a spreadsheet and does formulas, I do sometimes, and I know how to do that pretty well when I need to. And certainly for Tabriz, I did a lot of that. I did a lot of how do I use the math to show how these systems can interoperate, better, and give a better experience, give the experience I want them to. Um, so I've gotten a little better at time working on instinct and feel than I was at first. So now I do much more of a mixture of both. But I still use spreadsheets from time to time. I found myself in a current game design learning how to compute poker hand odds because a game I had needed it. And so I went out there and learned, oh yeah, there's some very solid math behind that. Um, and it only solves about a third of the problem, but that's okay. It was helpful.
That's very nice. So, do you consider like your quantitative skill or like systematic thinking like your superpower in your game designing?
I think it's one of the tools, one of the things that I do well, and one of the things that I bring to it. I don't really think of it as like a superpower. I've met plenty of designers who do it much better than I do, and use it to better effect than I do. And the games that really need that to be perfect, they're not the type of games I'm designing at the moment. So it's not as big of a deal to get everything to line up. Um, as an example for Cascadia, the only thing I did spreadsheets and numbers on was like tile counts and wildlife counts. Like it was relatively simple to figure out like what they should be, but like how do I create a balanced set of tiles? It's not that complicated of a math problem. And some people that I know can do it without thinking of it mathematically and just do it kind of scratching it on the paper without much thought really, really well. But I need a little more than that. So I did need a little bit to do that.
Got it, understood. Thanks so much for sharing the journey. So, you talk about you mentioned Cascadia, and I know that it was your first published game, and it became a breakout hit. And it has won more than a dozen major international awards, including the 2022 Spiel des Jahres. And it continues to be a global favorite. I played the game and I super enjoy it. So, what do you think resonated so strongly with players around the world?
It's a good question. And I think I could give a lot of little answers, and I don't think any of them would feel like they really answered it completely. There's a getting a hit like that, I think, has a combination of things going on. Did it, what was, was the time right for whatever it was you were providing in that game? Were players ready for that kind of thing? Um, did you happen to hit on a theme that people were growing into and wanting and at the moment? I think Cascadia hit that really well. And that's what I designed, but I also as I was designing it, Wingspan came out, And I think it, primed the pump for more people to want nature-themed games. It's not like they didn't exist before. They did, but there weren't as many that were hitting a big success until Wingspan came along. And so I think, Cascadia owes something to Wingspan's success in that regard for sure. I can point to a bunch of, unique small things about the game. I don't know if they matter that much for, why it hits so well. But I do think that one thing about it is, if you want a game that's going to continue to be what we call an evergreen, sell beyond that first 6 months or first year, if you're lucky, game, it does have to have something that makes it replayable for players. That's a thing. A lot of people try to define what it is that makes a game replayable. It's actually difficult to do so. Human beings are very emotional creatures, and different things happen to pull them in. But you need, one thing I do think you need is you need your game to appear super simple, but then when people play it, there's actually a lot going on to play it well. Like that's often, a secret sauce people are always trying to hit. And I think Cascadia got some of that. It's like, we tried to keep the rules really simple. Some people want to play the game and they're like, oh, I have to match my habitats when I lay this tile. Surely it has to match. It's like Carcassonne says, you must match road to road, you must match city to city, or you must match field to field. That's a simple rule, but Cascadia is even simpler. Just put edge to edge on a tile and that's fine. It doesn't necessarily tell you how to do that well, because there are reasons you want to match them, but it's not a rule. And so it makes it very approachable. Like, just place the tile anywhere and it works. And then once you play your first game that way and score really low, you can go, oh, okay, why, what do I need to do differently in that regard? And so I think Cascadia has a little bit out of it. It's approachable. Once you get in and try to play it, it's not always that easy. And I mean, I've played Cascadia, of course, longer than anyone, and I still play it regularly, mostly on apps these days. I find it really challenging to keep, scoring well in solo stuff, which is a lot of what I play. If I want to be able to, break 100 like every time that I play like a solo scenario, it doesn't happen. Just doesn't happen. Some of that is luck, and some of that is I played too early in the morning and I was a little too tired and I made a play that wasn't great. And some of it is, no, I just didn't do it as well as I could have. I didn't realize some of the things I could have done.
So you hit on a couple of interesting topics about game design about Cascadia, which I'm very curious about. Let's talk about its the replayability. So how can you make it so much replayable, and how do you balance the randomness and player control in the game?
Well, it's funny about randomness because a lot of people will complain about too much randomness or too little randomness, and that's very reasonable. But it's because randomness is actually one of the things that enables replayability. If everything starts the same, but your game better be incredibly mentally challenging. I mean, it's like pure abstract games like chess. Like, not a lot of those hit and play for a long period of time because they really have to be incredibly good. They have to, really stretch things. And after just a few player interactions, the game has to open up a lot. And yet the rules have to be very, very tight. It's incredibly difficult to design such games. Randomness, it gives you an opening to say, well, every game's going to be different at the start because of the randomness of what comes up. What comes up in the market in Cascadia? How does it match the starter tile that you got? What direction is that going to push you? And so every game becomes a little bit different in that regard. And I think you'll see a lot of people when they talk about, and a lot of people, I include us, like the publisher and myself and others, that we design replayability in Cascadia by the different scoring cards. That is true because there's something like 1,024 different combinations of the base scoring cards that you can play, and you can just randomly choose them and get probably something a little different every time. Push up, that is true. But it's actually not the most important part of replayability in Cascadia. It's actually driven by the randomness of what comes out, what other players take, and what your opportunities are. So like that actually is the core of it. Without that, all those different scoring combinations wouldn't really matter all that much. So yeah, I think randomness is kind of one of those key parts of it.
Awesome. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I'm curious if you intentionally like aimed to make the game as an evergreen game for both families and hobby gamers. How do you approach designing for different types of players like that?
Well, the first part is that when I started designing Cascadia, I didn't think a lot about target audience and who the game was meant to be good for. Not at that point. I mean, a little bit. Maybe I was starting to think about it, but not
Mhm.
much. I was just designing games that I would like to play that were interesting. Luckily, I like fairly complex games and I like very light games. I like a lot of different kinds of games, so it was pretty open as to what kind of games I might produce, even designing for myself. In many ways, Cascadia's success and the fact that I've been able to work more in that space and with flat out games has led me to think a lot more about that. Because as we've done follow ups and we've done variants and various things, we're really thinking about who is the audience for this? Is it the same as Cascadia? Is it meant to pull in more people than Cascadia? Is it, for people for whom Cascadia fell flat for some reason? Is this going to change it? And what can we do to accomplish those things? Those just weren't really a concern when I designed Cascadia per se. And I think that can be fine. And I think it can also be fine to focus on those things and say, what am I making this for? Because especially if you're pitching a game, that can really matter. If you say, I want to get a game published with this publisher, and you go develop a game of style A, and that publisher just doesn't publish style A, then you're missing out. And so, you should either just not think about that publisher and do the game you want, or you should change your direction and say, well, I want to work with them. So what is it that is their wheelhouse, and what do I like that can fit in there, and how can I design something that fits for them? So I do a lot more of that these days because I don't really want to be the designer of like one style of game. There are great designers out there who do that. I respect them a lot. I mean, Stefan Feld is a great one. He does some specific things, branches out a bit, but he does them really, really well. I don't know that I was ever going to be able to do that sort of thing. I never had that much of a niche, and I really wanted to be able to design all sorts of different games. So while Cascadia has given me this, well, we can design a bunch of games kind of in this universe and of this level, in many of the other areas, I push for things that are very different because I was like, well, I want to try this. I want to learn about that. I want to see if I can make something that this group would like to play. It's not necessarily an easy thing, and it can be very hard to do if you only rely on what your experience is and what you know. You have to get it in front of people. You have to bounce it off of people, because everyone's experience is kind of limited. So I might think I've designed something that works for a certain set of people, and then I might put it in front of them and realize, oh, I did not have the thinking right there. I was totally wrong about what mattered.
Yeah, that's very insightful. Thank you for sharing that. You mentioned like your partners, the flat out games, who help you to bring the game to your life, right? And so, how much of this success, like the game success, do you attribute to the team and your partners?
An immense amount of it. I think the games that people play when they sit at their table vary in how much it was, oh, the designer did 90% of what mattered versus, oh no, the designer did 50% of what mattered. And the team later, I think there's a lot of variation in that.
Right. Mhm.
If I showed people the game Cascadia was when Flat Out Games signed it, I mean, many people know what it was. It was not the game that won the Spiel des Jahres, and that game never would have won the Spiel des Jahres if it was actually published that way. Now, some of that was things I put off changing until I signed it with Flat Out, and we did it together. And some of that is stuff that came about during that design process. There were things in there that I didn't even, I wasn't even a part of inventing, that I was a part of developing and making it work. But, I wasn't necessarily a part of, like, the parts that did work with them on were getting rid of the board. Cascadia initially had a board similar to Calico, actually, which is ironic because I'd only played Calico like once at that point. But I talked with Sean from Flat Out Games that after we signed it, the first thing we planned to do was just play it without the board, just literally remove it and see how it goes, because we thought it would be more interesting. We thought it would introduce a lot of problems we had to solve. It actually didn't. It actually worked better without the board, like from the start. Another area was splitting the tile habitats. That was an idea I had that Sean was really big on, and And we tried that out and started, and that also was one of those things where once we did it, it kind of opened up the possibilities for the game. Because before that, every tile just had a single habitat. It's like the keystone tiles, like everything was a keystone tile kind of thing. So it was a lot simpler. But an example where my involvement wasn't immediate from the start is actually the one of the things it gets the most credit for, which is the entangled drafting. So the fact that you have to pick a wildlife token and a tile that are lined up out of four. So you might see the tile you want, the token you want, and not be able to take them together. That came about from working with Flat Out, from experience they had with publishing, with playtesting it with others, and we went from there. So there were many ideas, and that's the great thing about working with a team of, honestly, designers who are also developers and publishers. And doing that is, if you are all really focused on making the game the best that it can be, you can do a lot that's really, really good with it. And I've actually been pretty lucky to be able to be part of the process, both for Tabriz as well. And that actually has also been very good. It's not the same, but I've been able to be involved. But being involved with Flat Out, both that you feel comfortable that any rough edges, someone's going to come up with the idea to smooth it out, to figure it out in that room. You feel like it's gonna happen. Is fantastic. And then also you learn so much from each other. I mean, I'm working with different people in our collabs as we've moved on other Cascadia projects, and I'm actually working on other Flat Out games by other designers as part of that process now. And I just we just continue to learn from each other and learn what works and what doesn't, and where to spend time and not to spend time, and what ways fun can be had that we didn't expect, all of that. So it's really a great process, and it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun for me taking that next step. It's really nice to be able to say, I designed something, I gave you the core, it works pretty darn well, but then I get to be involved in making the thing real and making it final. I'm sure there's some designers who would prefer to step away at that point, and most of our industry works that way, or close to it. But I definitely really enjoy being able to continue being part of that process, especially with people who really know what they're doing.
Yeah, very nice. So you really value the partnership you have with Flat Out Games. What are the partners that you work with?
So for Tabriz, I've worked with Crafty Games, and they also hired Brieger Creative, John Brieger's company, to do development work on Tabriz. And this is definitely a very different process. For example, most of the development of Tabriz itself was done by Brieger Creative, with feedback and input and loops with Crafty Games and me, on the emails and that kind of stuff. But they were the core of doing the work, and I was more in there to give feedback, maybe to throw out some ideas when they were trying things, but it was mostly their work. For me, that was good because I had a lot of other stuff going on. So it's like, I can only do so much of, that development, at the same time. But I was really pleased with how that process went. And just like Cascadia, Tabriz is a much better game, because of that process. It was also a simpler game when signed, and some very smooth, stuff was added in. Some of the issues that I think it still had at the time were fixed very, very nicely. So it's nice to be a part of that process, even if it's a little more distant. So yeah, and so now, last one I'll talk about is Cats and Dragons, which should crowdfund this year with Pika Games, which is the sister to Fantasia Games. That's done Endless Winter, and Unconscious Mind, and now Pika does Flow. And with Cats and Dragons, I work with them a good bit. It's a little more like Crafty in that they're kind of responsible, but I've done a lot of work after the game was designed. I've worked with Johnny Pat Canton, who's their head developer essentially, on that, and there's some similar things that come from that. I've had work with Johnny before a convention where he's going to play test things or try things out, and he's throwing out ideas. It's a great process to see when someone understands the game design as well as you do, and is trying to make it the best it can be. Things come out. He could see things that I couldn't, maybe because I was a little too deep into it for too long. And he would say things, well, what if we did this? And I would immediately like perk up, like, oh yeah, that's exactly what's that's exactly doing exactly what I want it to do there now. With that, I think we need to try that. So
So it seemed to me that you have a lot of partners, and you ran into them like by luck, or like how did you navigate the industry when you
yeah.
first enter it? It was just your debut game, but you make it a success, and I wonder like how did all the process happen? Like how did you navigate it? And do you think success in the board game world, especially for a debut game, comes down to luck, timing, or something else?
I'm a big believer that in most large successes, there's a big dose of luck. um, and it's sometimes hard to point out, sometimes not. For me, I will certainly say that, and I was actually just writing about this in a designer diary. I think I was very lucky in the time that I got into game design and the city that I got into game design. That was just largely luck. I did not get into board games because I was in Seattle. I've already kind of talked about how that happened. That wasn't really related to Seattle. But when I first started like looking around about the industry, I was like, there's a lot going on here. And it was interesting because there were board game companies here. Seattle has a number of different board game companies, and some that have been around quite a while. Um, but they're actually not the kind of companies that publish the kind of games that I make. They're not really hobby game companies that we would think of for the most part. And so it was interesting that there was sort of this whole generation of designers play testing games that were a little more broad, a little more, at least within hobby games and all that, going to play test events. And I started meeting people that, just were doing the same thing that I was doing. And many of them at the same point in the process, or maybe they've been doing it for 6 months longer or something. And yet I would immediately go, wow, they're really good at this. And so, talking about working with a team, I mean, in a way, the first stage of that was meeting the people doing game design in Seattle and going to like Playtest Northwest, the local organization's events, and meeting more of them and being able to, play test my games with them and learn from them and learn from each other is the thing. That's you go in thinking I'm learning, and then you realize actually we're all learning through this process, of coming up. And we didn't need like an expert game designer to be in the room. None of us were that. Most of us had never done it before and we're just self-starters and trying it out. We were just all very curious, very eager to use resources and learn, but also wanting to do the games we wanted to do the way we wanted to do them. And so I think that time was I just was very lucky in that regard, and that led to Cascadia and Flat Out because Sean Stankiewicz is actually one of the first local designers I met at a kind of a board game design meetup. And that eventually led to a regular weekly meeting. I said led to, with some other folks started it. And Emma Larkins and Sean were key people, and a few others started up this, weekly meeting. And so that's, I got to know Sean pretty well. So, I talked about, pitching games at Gen Con and various things, but Cascadia wasn't like that. Cascadia, I had designed in about 3 weeks. I had just started playtesting it with some of these folks I'm talking about at a few random spots. And then I was like, okay, let me see if I can get this thing in a state to pitch it this summer at conventions. Or I was going to Origins and Gen Con this year. And, in 2019 and all of that. And in the meantime, Sean had playtested it a couple of times. And one night he made sure that his partner Molly playtested it. And then eventually he came to me and said, look, we're getting ready to crowdfund Calico, our first game, because they had decided they wanted to be publishers after doing a lot of design. They hadn't published a game yet. And he said, we'd like Cascadia to be the second. Like he recognized that it shared something with Calico and that was very puzzly and how you put things together. And he really liked the game. So,
It's awesome.
yeah, it's awesome. But there's a lot of luck in that, for me anyway. Sean and Molly and Rob did all this work to create their company at the right time for me when that came along, and I got that offer. And so, that's, I write off, a certain amount of luck on that. On the other hand, I'm tenacious when I get an idea that works. I will sit back there and solo test it and iterate on it until I'm ready. I'll put it in front of people. I will go back and when I get into a design that I really think has a lot of promise and I'm making progress on, I will push on it very, very hard. And so, it's that axiom about hard work. Yes, I do the hard work, but I also recognize that the hard work plus the luck is often what leads there. Now I get to take advantage of that. I get to take advantage of the fact that I did the hard work, and I'll still do the hard work, and I had the luck. It definitely gives me a lot more inroads, to make things happen. And so that's entirely up to me.
Yes, that's brilliant. I think it's a combination of not just luck, but hard work, but also some genius. I do think that you have so much talent for game designs. That's why you made it happen. Yeah. And so, but how did it feel when you found out Cascadia won the Spiel des Jahres? What impact did that award have on you personally and professionally?
I mean, it's had a big impact. It's sometimes hard to pinpoint because Cascadia, by the time it was nominated, was already a very big success, and looked like it was going to be an evergreen title for quite a while. So it's hard to separate that from actually winning the award. And there's also the fact that in the United States, the Spiel des Jahres, it means a lot to a small segment of our board gamers in the United States, but most publishers don't even pay to get the label on it. It's not important enough for U.S. sales. In Germany, of course, it's very different, and in many other European countries, it's very different. So it's kind of hard to separate that. But it's an interesting process because with Flat Out Games, I think a lot of folks thought Calico had a chance at being nominated. It was a pretty big sensation, and that kind of puzzly hex game, it really slotted in there, and I don't it like did not even get the long list or whatever, which is a little surprise, although their Game Point Salad did. So there was a little bit of history there with flirting with the Spiel des Jahres for Flat Out already after one title and one of their own designs published by AEG. It wasn't considered out of the realm that Cascadia could get a nomination. And what it takes to get a nomination, it's a bit of a black box to me, somewhat. There's no doubt that Cosmos is a big reason that it got the nomination. They were very upfront. They came to us to say, we want to publish Cascadia in Germany. This wasn't a case of normally AEG goes out and they find, foreign publishers for each one and pitch it. And I honestly don't know a lot about that process. But in this case, I actually was personally contacted by Wolfgang from Cosmos that they wanted to do it. And there's no doubt that they focus on doing the best they can to put games out to win those awards. Hey, they have a game nominated in all three categories this year. So they know how to smooth the games. They know how to do the other things. So that's definitely a big part of it too. I think when it came time for them to announce the winner, I joke, I tell people I don't know. Like, I wasn't even going to go to the ceremony. Like, really, I'm going to pay this much money to fly, across the ocean for something that we might not even win. Like, is that, whatever. And a couple of people said, yeah, you should go. And I had a chat with Elizabeth Hargrave, who was very much like, yes, you need to go. She gave me a lot more detail than that, but and so luckily I did. But at that moment, I tell people I convinced myself that Scout was going to win it. Like in just the time before, no, I think Scout has this. So I guess that gave me a right to be truly surprised when we did win. And it's a hard feeling to describe. I got asked that question after the ceremony, walking across the room 10 times by different interviewers. How does it feel, or how does it, like, I don't really know. It's kind of overwhelming. It's amazing. And I think there's also, with that award, there is a lot of focus on the designer at the time, as opposed to publishers and others. They're all part of the process. There's a lot, and to me, that's both great because there are many industries and many parts of the game industry sometimes where the designers are kind of like ignored, whatever. So it's good to see that focus, but it also felt a little bit to me like this is a team effort. I mean, I could go back to Seattle and pull like 3 or 4 other people in here and say they belong on the stage, as much as I do. So I tried to, keep that in mind as we went up there. So
Amazing. Yeah. And do your family, your friends now know about you as a famous board game designer? Like,
yeah, most of them know. I mean, all my family knows. They now know what the Spiel des Jahres is.
proud.
Yeah. And and I, for my day job, people I work directly with know, and a few others signed a copy of Cascadia for my boss's boss, that kind of stuff. So, it's out there. So.
So after the first edition of Cascadia, like how many expansions do you have, and how do you plan for your future expansions as well?
Yeah, the first thing we did was the landmarks expansion. And that ended up being a couple years later. We didn't like rush into it. There was a lot of Cascadias being, it was a big success, and Cosmos in particular was said that an expansion should do really well and really help the game. There were things that were kept out of Cascadia. There, as much as I said it was simple and we added to it, there were some things that I was playing in Cascadia that were removed. So we started gathering those ideas, and said, okay, seems like Cosmos is interested. Flat out decided it was worth doing, and AEG was happy about it as well. So we just started throwing those ideas together, figuring out what we come up with. Most of the ideas from things that were done in the past were actually not chosen. We didn't choose them, and we worked on this project as a team from the start. So if basically the designer credit on Landmarks is Molly, Sean, Rob, and myself. So I really designed it with the flat out principles, and that's the true type of project it was. Is we went through all the ideas, saw what landed, tried things, and we actually initially created a simpler expansion that would have been a cheaper one. And that's where, in discussions with Cosmos and AEG, it was decided that no, we actually would like it to be a little more substantial. And we also knew that Cosmos in particular was very interested in a 5 to 6 player expansion. And we had tossed about ideas for that, but it was not in that initial cut. And that's where we went back and said, well, if we take everything we've done already and add in what's needed for 5 to 6 players, is that going to, can we do that at the price point and all of that stuff that they want? And does it feel like a solid product, a solid addition? And it really did. We really are like, here we need tiles. Here's what we have to have for tiles. And we need a couple more of the other components, not a big deal. And we need some sort of rules change just to allow people to speed a way to speed up the game, because we knew you could play Cascadia with 5 to 6 players by taking 2 boxes and combining components like that. That works absolutely fine. But often what you'll find is they go pretty long. That works for some people. That works for some people really well. For others, it's like, no, for a game like Cascadia, if an hour and a half goes by and I'm still playing, something's wrong. So those were the things we needed. We figured it out. We played around with some new tile orientations to give, new stuff to throw in. I had a guiding principle of sorts with this that I reiterated time and time again, is that one of the things I love about Carcassonne expansions is you can add in whatever ones you want, and they just work together. Some work, better with each other than others. And you can even go into some of them and play with parts of them and not others. One of my favorites is that you can play with the builder in Carcassonne without the rest of the thing from the Traders and Builders expansion. Just that one piece works great. And so I wanted the Cascadia expansions to feel modular like that. And so, we created an expansion that had, fresh cards. You can use those with the base game, actually, or you can use with this. We created the landmarks themselves, the sort of thing behind the name, and then we also added in the new tiles. We made sure the new tiles would not upset the basic game at all. And so, so we tell people, if you want to put everything in the same box, you don't need to separate the tiles. In Carcassonne, you need to separate the tiles for the most part. You need to keep them separate. But in Cascadia, if you don't mind playing with the full set of tiles every time, just put them together. You don't need to bother separating them and go through that work. And so that was kind of a guiding principle for landmarks. And that was a true, that was an expansion for Cascadia. Will there be more expansions for Cascadia? I would say it's probably likely, but I would say we're not actively pushing anything right now. We focused on, for Cascadia, we focused on creating the junior version specifically. And that was something that Flat Out obviously didn't have kids titles. Cosmos does a lot of children's games. So we that was another thing. They were happy to have a junior version. So we got play tests from them. We got, feedback from them, when we got to a certain point. In that case, though, I had wanted to work with Fortessa Elise, a great designer, now works with Pokemon as well. But she had started working with Flat Out, and Sean was happy to have me work with her on this too. So I said, well, let's let Fortessa and I go off and design something, and we'll bring it back and see how it goes. And that process was a little different. We did that design work before bringing it back to the collab, and I think it went really well. It was a lot of fun as a process. Got to learn a lot. Fortessa had some great experience from Funko at turning over designs quickly, more focus on younger players at times, all sorts of experience I didn't have. And so that game was a great co-design, a lot of fun. And then we brought it into the collab process like any others. For various reasons, Fortessa wasn't able to work on that collab with us, but the rest of us were, and we added Joseph Z. Chen on there and worked through that. And as usual, the game changed a good bit during the collab while keeping the core of what Fortessa and I had designed. So that was a little bit of a different process.
Mhm. That's so interesting that you have so many projects going on with Cascadia. And again, congrats on the success of the game and all of its expansions. And I know that you recently released a new game earlier this year, which is Tap Breeze, right?
Yeah.
And so, for those who haven't had a chance to play the game, could you give us an introduction to this game?
Yeah. So Tabriz is actually the first first game design that I play tested publicly outside of my family. And it's the first game that I got signed. It was signed in 2018, while Cascadia was designed and signed in 2019. For various reasons, it took a lot longer to come out. It's certainly a bigger game than Cascadia in about every way. Although it's still, for its genre, fairly light. It is a worker movement game where you are gathering 5 different materials to make Persian carpets for commissions that tell you what materials have to go into them and what rewards you will get. It is themed around the ancient city of Tabriz, which was on the Silk Road, which has the oldest continuously operating covered bazaar in the world, and that bazaar has a specific section for Persian carpets. I lived in Iran for 2.5 years as a child. I did not go to Tabriz. I lived in Esfahan, but I had designed this game without a theme initially. And when I was searching for a theme at some point, I realized, well, Persian carpets would work well. And I always thought it would be great to do, something, Iranian themed, especially given how much I love Iranian food, as that's mostly what I cook. And I realized pretty quickly when I thought it through that fit really well with what was already there. And so I went off and did my research, about carpets, and figured out what the resources needed to be, a little more research on the bazaar so that I wasn't doing anything weird, and went on from there. So one of the differences with Tabriz, though, is that it has a very deluxe presentation. A lot of effort was spent on the art, a lot of effort spent on the components, and for me, it's a really gorgeous game that is relatively deluxe. Right, it's not a deluxe version; it's just the game is deluxe itself. And so I really enjoy having something that I designed, come across and feel that nice and that well. We hired Persian artist Sid Feeney, who's mostly done graphic novel work, to do the cover and the playmat design and a few other items in the game, which just turned out wonderfully. And Dan May, Quill Silver Studio, did great work on the rest of the art and the artistic direction and all of that. And that was, again, a part of the process. I was able to be in that process while I wasn't as directly involved as I am with Flat Out, but I got to see all of the throwing around of the art ideas. And in fact, the cover design is a little boy running through that part of the Grand Bazaar of Tabriz that's Persian carpets. I actually found the photo of that section of the bazaar, and I suggested the cover be from that. I did not suggest the little boy. I don't know where that came from, but it was brilliant. And so it was really, really nice to be a part of that process and see the art come along and all of that. So the good news with Tabriz is, yes, it's kind of a resource management game, order fulfillment, if you will, all these kind of technical terms we've got. But it's also the kind of game that's relatively easy to teach to people who don't play those kind of games. It doesn't have a lot of complicated rules, and presents itself pretty well. So yeah, and that was crowdfunded a little while ago, and then just started being delivered at the end of last year and into this year, and then hit stores this year. So
That's awesome. I'm very intrigued, about the game after hearing you. But it's really, really interesting. I'm so looking forward to it. Yeah, but so it seemed to me that two of your games, explore different genre, and so if someone plays both of them, what do you hope they would say about your design style?
Um, that's a really interesting question. I think I see again and again that, artists of any stripe don't have a lot of control over, what people say about their art, whether that's a board game design, a physical piece of art, or the television show. It's a little bit tough. But I am certainly a person that doesn't have like I don't have a specific message or a specific style that I'm trying to get across. I like to experiment and see that I can make things work in different genres. I mean, if there's one thing that I think I have learned and started to push on really hard, it is simplicity. That's a tough concept because games can be too simple. It's not like every game should be simple. But I think one of the things I try to focus on is like, given the kind of game this is, given the area that it brings joy, and given what it's required to play it, like, how can it be the most simple? How can, we remove the stuff that it just gets in the way of the actual fun without removing, the complexity that actually makes it that fun. Um, and so sometimes I have, a habit of going a little too far with that. And then other people are adding back in, or I'm working with other people to add back in the pieces that build it up. But I think that's something I've learned from like the first game I tried to design on my own, and other things about, what I like to do. And so if I've got something that's complicated, I will keep thinking about it. I will keep hammering on it. And again, Seattle board game designers still, play test here locally with them, and spend time with, a good group of guys and women that do, great stuff and give great feedback, and will push on that for me. And a lot of them have a similar attitude. They'll be like, it doesn't seem like your game needs this. Like, they're really, trying to say, how can it be as simple as it needs to be? And I get that a lot from them, so it's a nice reinforcement.
So it's amazing. Okay, so yeah, we've run over like all of the great questions, but so now I hope you can answer the last question here. We know that you have participated in the Road to Essence 2025 competitions as a special judge. So is it the Road to Essence is like an initiative that highlights the most promising unpublished games from Vietnam and helps bring them to to Spiel Essence, the world's biggest board game convention. So, what is your advice for for Vietnamese board game designers or any designer from underrepresented regions to not only compete but truly shine on the global stage?
I thought about this a little bit. It's definitely a hard question. There's a lot of nice technical answers that can be given, to do this or to do that, focus on these things. But as I thought about it, a lot of things I think, if you go back to our conversation, you see coming through and you asking questions about, are like, what is it that you bring to this design that someone else might not? And I don't mean try to be like the innovator, the crazy innovator who does something that's never been thought of in 50 years. Like, people can think of innovation a little too out there at times, but it's a lot more about just what is it you bring? Be true to yourself, be true to what you think you can do well. If that's designing games that you would like to play, that really can be a thing. If it's like you have a passion for a certain area, and you think you know it well and can make that work really well, do it. But lean into it. If you're just trying to learn the ropes, and, oh, I need to do a little of this and a little of that, and this is what happens, like, you're more likely, I think, to create something that's a little too generic, that is not going to stand out. Maybe it will work just fine, but not stand out. Unfortunately, all of that advice is like, but how can you measure whether you've done that, or whether that's actually successful, or whatsoever? It's not easy. And I will also say there are people in all fields that almost do the opposite, that they think, if I'm doing things that's me, I actually don't think it works. And they learn, what to mimic and what to do, and be successful at it. But if you're just someone who's not in the industry, doesn't have a place in the industry, and you're trying to figure out, what can I do to stand out? I still kind of think, leaning more into what it is you can bring, and do your best is probably the best approach.
That's amazing. But how does a person find out what is a unique strength or what they should bring on to the table?
Yeah. I think that is tough. And I try to think like how have I, gotten there? And for me, I think it's a lot of what I think of as iteration. It's just trying things again and again and again until I feel that something's coming out of it. Like the guy can get to where I feel that there's something to a game. And I think that's one of the things I've realized about myself. Like I'll be like, yeah, I know there's really something here. I can feel it when I play it. I can feel it when I watch others play it. And it's there. How do I make that come out? I think one of the best examples of that is what became Cascadia Rolling. That was an old design, Rolling Up Roses, that we rethemed and then developed a lot for Cascadia. I couldn't get publishers to bite on it, but in my heart, I knew like there is something special about this. And so every year or two, I would come back to it and do a little more and try something. In my case, again, I don't know if it's luck, but the Flat Out folks, they had wanted to publish it, but had a hard time, figuring out where it fit in things. And then one day, it's like, let's make it a Cascadia game. Here's how that could work. And I feel like that core finally got out there to shine. But it's, how do you recognize that? Hard question to answer. But I think that's what you want to be able to do is when you can feel that you've got something. What is that something? What did you do? How is that working? And how do I bring it out?
I see. Yeah, amazing. Thank you so much. I learned a lot, through your advice. And yeah, so Randy, so we have run out of time, but yeah, thank you so much for joining us today. And it's truly like inspiring to hear about your journey, your stories behind your games, and also your insights and advice for our designers. And so, yeah, to all of our listeners, I hope Randy's story motivates you to keep designing, keep experimenting, and keep sharing your unique voices with the world. This has been your turn. Subscribe to our channel for the next episode. See you next time. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Your turn.